The moment the weapons rose, my heart stopped. I was standing in a line of nervous travelers, halfway through my turn at the security scanner, when every guard in the terminal snapped to attention at once. 40 armored figures, tall and silver-skinned, lifted their weapons in one sharp motion. My hands went cold. My mind jumped straight to the worst answer. Someone had done something wrong. Someone was about to get hurt. Maybe it was me. I did not move. I did not breathe. Around me, other travelers froze too, caught mid-step, mid-sentence, mid-thought. A woman beside me grabbed her son's hand and pulled him close. An old man dropped his bag and did not bother picking it up. For 3 full seconds, nobody in that terminal knew if they would walk out alive. Then I noticed something strange. The weapons were not pointed at us. They were angled up and across each guard's chest, held tight against armor plating, elbows locked, chins raised. It was not an attack stance. It looked like something else, something I had only seen in old films about soldiers standing for their flag. A voice crackled through the translator bead in my ear, calm and steady, cutting through the panic like a blade through fog. Hold position. Do not move. This is a formal honor, not a threat. I turned my head, slow and careful, toward the entrance the guards were facing. A man walked through the far doors. He was ordinary-looking, gray-haired, wearing a simple gray coat, carrying nothing but a small leather bag. He walked with the calm rhythm of someone who had nowhere urgent to be, though every armed figure around him stood like statues carved from starlight. I did not understand yet. None of us did. But something told me this was not a mistake, and it was not danger. It was something bigger, something none of us in that terminal had been prepared to witness. My name is Daniel, and 3 days earlier I had been fixing a broken generator on a supply station far from home, with no idea I would end up standing in an alien terminal watching history happen in front of me. I had been sent there for one reason only, a routine repair job on a translation relay used by human travelers passing through the new gate connecting our world to a much older civilization called the Vantor. The Vantor had opened contact with humanity 2 years earlier, cautious and formal, offering trade routes and shared knowledge in exchange for peace and patience. Their guards patrolled every terminal we used, polite but firm, watching everyone equally, showing no favor to any single person. Until that morning. The gray-haired man kept walking, calm and unhurried, past guard after guard, each one snapping into the same rigid salute as he passed. Nobody spoke to him. Nobody stopped him. It was as if the entire terminal had rearranged itself around his presence, and the rest of us were simply extra pieces caught inside someone else's ceremony. I turned to the young woman standing next to me, a researcher with a university badge clipped to her jacket. Her name was Grace, and she looked just as stunned as I felt. "Do you know who that is?" I whispered. She shook her head slowly, eyes locked on the man. "No idea, but whoever he is, they clearly do." The guard's captain, a tall figure with silver markings across her shoulder plates, stepped forward and pressed a closed fist against her chest. Her voice, translated a half-second later through my earpiece, rang clear across the silent terminal. "Walker who did not fall. The gate remembers your name." The gray-haired man paused, gave a small nod, and answered in a tired but steady voice. "I was only doing my job, nothing more." I felt a strange chill crawl up my spine. Whatever this man had done, it clearly meant something enormous to a species that rarely showed emotion, let alone reverence, and I had a growing feeling I was about to learn exactly what that was. The captain did not step aside right away. She held her position, weapon still raised, staring at him with something close to awe. Around her, every other guard mirrored the stance exactly, unmoving, unblinking, waiting. Grace leaned toward me again, voice barely above a breath. "I heard something once, a rumor about a rescue years ago. A human ship that went missing past the outer belt. Everyone thought the crew died. Maybe this is connected." Before I could respond, the terminal's main display flickered on, showing a live translation feed meant for public record. Words scrolled across the screen in careful, formal Vantor script, followed by the English translation beneath it. "By decree of the Vantor Assembly, all personnel shall render full honors to the one recognized as unbroken, survivor of the long silence, keeper of duty beyond hope." The room stayed frozen, every human eye locked on that scrolling text, every heartbeat suspended somewhere between disbelief and awe. I did not know the full story yet, but I knew I was standing inside a moment that would matter. One of those rare instances where history stops pretending to be ordinary and shows its true weight. The gray-haired man reached the center of the terminal, where a raised platform stood beneath a curved window looking out toward open space. He turned to face the crowd of humans still frozen in their lines, guards still locked in salute around him, and for the first time, he looked almost embarrassed by the attention. "You can all breathe now," he said, voice carrying gently across the silence. "I promise none of you are in trouble." A ripple of nervous laughter broke the tension, and slowly, cautiously, people began to move again, though nobody dared look away from him for long. I stepped forward without thinking, driven by something between curiosity and instinct. Grace followed close behind me, her badge swinging against her chest. "Sir," I said, my voice shakier than I wanted it to be, "what happened? Why are they saluting you like this?" He studied me for a moment, his eyes calm but tired, the kind of tired that comes from carrying something heavy for a very long time. "My name is Elias," he said. "A long time ago, I was part of a small crew sent past the edge of known space, testing new engines nobody had ever trusted with a real mission. Something went wrong. Our ship lost power far from any rescue route, and we drifted for longer than anyone expected a person to survive." Grace's breath caught beside me. "That was the Ellison mission," she whispered. "I studied it in school. They said everyone was lost." Elias gave a small, humorless smile. "Everyone but one," he continued, voice steady despite the weight of what he described. 4 years. 4 years alone in a broken ship with failing systems, rationed food, and no signal reaching anyone who could help. He had spent that time doing the only thing that made sense to him, keeping systems running, recording data, following procedures meant for a 9-month assignment that stretched into something far longer than anyone had imagined surviving. "I did not do anything heroic," he said quietly. "I just refused to stop working. It felt easier than giving up." The guards around him did not move, still locked in their formal stance, listening, as if his words were sacred text. A Vantor patrol had eventually found his ship by pure chance, decades before humanity had formal contact with their people. Elias explained that the discovery had shaken them deeply, not because a human had survived, but because of how he had survived. Their culture placed enormous value on duty carried out without witness or reward, a concept they believed almost impossible for any young species to embody so completely. "They gave me a title I still don't fully understand," Elias said. "Something about being unbroken by silence. I never asked for it. I just wanted to go home." I looked around the terminal, at hundreds of travelers now watching in complete silence, at guards holding their honor stance without a single twitch of fatigue, and I understood, slowly, why this moment mattered so much. It was not about weapons or danger. It was about respect earned in a place where no one had been watching, respect that had followed him across years and space until this very hallway. Grace stepped closer, notebook forgotten in her bag, eyes wide with something between scholarly excitement and pure human wonder. "Do they do this every time you travel?" Elias sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Every single time, I have tried asking them to stop. They tell me duty recognized cannot be undone." A voice crackled again over my earpiece, translated smoothly from the captain's own words as she finally lowered her weapon. "Forgive our silence, honored guest. Word arrived only moments before your ship landed. We prepared as quickly as protocol allowed." Elias nodded to her, a gesture that seemed almost apologetic, as if he still felt guilty for causing such disruption simply by walking through a public terminal. The tension in the room began to soften, replaced slowly by something warmer. A few travelers began clapping, unsure at first, then more confidently as others joined in. Children peeked out from behind their parents, staring at the guards still holding their poses like statues brought briefly to life for one man's arrival. I found myself clapping too, though I barely understood why. Maybe it was relief. Maybe it was the strange privilege of witnessing something few people would ever see. Or maybe it was simply the sight of quiet dignity being honored by a species that rarely showed such open reverence to anyone, let alone an ordinary-looking traveler in a simple gray coat. Elias raised a hand gently, asking for calm, and the applause faded into an expectant hush. "I only want to say one thing," he said, his voice carrying easily now across the silent terminal. "I was not special. I was scared, and alone, and certain more days than not that I would not make it home. What kept me going was not courage, it was routine. Small tasks, repeated slowly, one after another, because giving up felt harder than continuing." He paused, looking out at the crowd of humans staring back at him with a mixture of awe and quiet recognition. "If any of you ever find yourselves in a place that feels impossible, remember that surviving does not always require bravery. Sometimes it only requires refusing to stop." The silence that followed felt different from the one before, no longer tense but full, heavy with something like gratitude. The captain stepped beside him then, her tone formal but noticeably softer than before. "The assembly requests your presence for a private ceremony, if you are willing." Elias nodded once, glancing briefly at the crowd still gathered around him. His eyes found mine again for a moment, and he offered a small, tired smile. "Take care of each other out here," he said simply, before turning to follow the guards toward a side corridor. The moment he stepped away, the frozen formation broke apart. Guards lowered their weapons fully, resuming their normal patrol positions as if nothing unusual had happened at all, though the air in the terminal still carried a strange electric charge that would take a long while to fade. Grace turned to me, notebook back in hand, pen already moving across the page. "I need to write about this properly. Nobody back home is going to believe it unless someone explains it right." I nodded, still trying to steady my own thoughts. My hands had stopped shaking, but my mind kept replaying the sight of 40 armed strangers frozen in respect for one quiet man who insisted he had done nothing special. "Do you think he's right?" I asked. "That surviving is really just about refusing to stop?" Grace considered the question carefully before answering. "I think it is more complicated than that, but I also think there is something true buried inside it. Sometimes the hardest thing a person can do is keep going when nobody is watching, when no reward waits at the end, when giving up would be so much easier." We stood there a while longer, watching the terminal slowly return to its normal rhythm, travelers resuming their lines, guards resuming their quiet patrols, the strange magic of the moment folding itself back into ordinary routine. I finished my repair job later that day, working alone in a maintenance corridor far from the crowds, thinking about everything Elias had said. It struck me how strange it was that a man who spent 4 years completely isolated, with no audience for his choices, had ended up honored so publicly, so formally, by a species that valued exactly that kind of quiet persistence. Later that evening, as I waited for my transport back to the supply station, I passed through the terminal one final time. The guards were back to their usual formation, calm and watchful, showing no sign of the extraordinary display from earlier. Yet something about the room felt different to me now, as if the walls themselves remembered what had happened, even if the routine had resumed exactly as before. Grace found me near the boarding gate, her notebook now filled with pages of notes, her expression thoughtful. "I looked into it more," she said. "The Vantor have a concept, roughly translated as unwitnessed duty. It refers to actions performed correctly and honorably, even when no one will ever know or reward them. Apparently it is one of the highest values in their entire culture." "And they think Elias represents that perfectly," I said. She nodded. "More than that. They believe very few beings, of any species, ever truly embody it. To them, what he did was not survival. It was proof of character under conditions designed to break it." I thought about that for a long moment, staring out through the terminal's wide window at the stars beyond, distant points of light representing places none of us could fully imagine, places where a man once drifted alone for years, choosing every single day to keep working instead of giving in to despair. "It makes you wonder," I said slowly, "how many people carry something like that inside them and never get the chance to show it?" Grace smiled softly. "Maybe that is the real lesson here. Not the ceremony, not the salute, but the reminder that quiet persistence matters, even when no one is watching, even when the reward may never come." My transport arrived shortly after, and I said goodbye to Grace, promising to read whatever article she eventually wrote about the events we had witnessed together. As I boarded, I glanced back one final time at the terminal, now filled again with ordinary travelers moving through their ordinary days, unaware of how close they had come to witnessing something extraordinary hours earlier. The flight back to the supply station gave me plenty of time to think. I kept returning to Elias's words, simple and unassuming, yet somehow carrying more weight than any grand speech could have managed. He had not asked for honor. He had not sought recognition. He had simply continued doing his work, day after day, in complete isolation, refusing to let despair dictate his choices. By the time I returned to my usual routine, fixing generators and rewiring old systems that nobody else wanted to bother with, I found myself approaching the work differently. It was still tedious. It was still thankless most days. But now I understood something I had not fully grasped before, that the value of steady, quiet effort did not depend on who noticed it. Months later, I heard through a passing traveler that Elias had returned to a simple life somewhere quiet, away from ceremonies and formal honors, content to live out his days without further fuss. The Vantor, from what I understood, continued to honor him whenever he traveled, unable or unwilling to separate the man from the meaning he now represented to their entire culture. I never saw him again after that day in the terminal, but I never forgot the sight of 40 armed guards frozen in respect for one ordinary-looking man who insisted, quietly and firmly, that he had done nothing more than refuse to give up. Sometimes, late at night, working alone on some forgotten piece of equipment, I think back to that moment and feel a strange comfort settle over me. Not everyone gets a terminal full of witnesses, not everyone gets a formal salute. But perhaps that was never really the point. The point, I have come to believe, is simpler and far more universal than any grand ceremony could ever capture. It is the quiet decision, made again and again, in moments no one else will ever see, to keep going anyway. That, more than any salute or honor, felt like the truest tribute to what Elias had survived, and it stayed with me long after the terminal doors closed behind that unforgettable day.